So I watched the Gavin versus Skylar fiction debate, and wow, what a dumpster fire that was, huh? That was one of the weirdest debates I've ever seen. That was one of the weirdest, most non-productive debates, basically, of all time. There used to be a couple debates like that last year on the Non Sequitur show, like Aaron Robb versus Kent Hovind or Flat Earther debates. But that's one of the first ones I've seen in a while. So what happened? Well, okay, so Gavin kind of started the problem. And now I know Gavin. I've streamed with him on Stephanie's channel, actually, and I like Gavin. We had a good conversation on Stephanie's channel about Kanye West. He was making really good points, and he was basically fine. That conversation got pulled down because Kanye West came after us. So you can't stream. Here we are trying to tell everyone about how it's good that he's become a Christian, and they basically pulled it. They said, no, you can't do that. So we never got that channel, never aired. But if you were to see it, Gavin was on there making really good points, really solid points about the nature of the world we live in and how corrupt it has become. Then yesterday, I think it was, he was in a debate and everything was relatively normal. It kind of went on modern day debate. I watched a little bit of it, only watched about 5 minutes, and it went the way you would expect. Just a normal Christian atheist or Christian agnostic back and forth. So what happened with this one? Well, right at the beginning, Gavin basically decides that Skylar didn't answer the question and says as much. So he kind of just shuts down the debate. Debate's over. I declare the debate over. You didn't answer the question. I'm taking my ball and going home, more or less. I win by default. Now, you can't really do that in a debate. I kind of get what Gavin was saying, but you're in a debate, and it's a back and forth. So if your opponent doesn't say, you're right, I yield, debate is over, you win, and Skylar didn't say that, you kind of got to explain it to them. I kind of get the point that Gavin was making. And I'll explain that in a minute and go on the substance of what Skylar was arguing. But here's the point that Skylar seemed to be making. Okay, Skylar said that the point of the debate was the Christian God does not exist, and Skylar was basically trying to prove that the Christian God can exist by saying, as written in the Bible, okay, the nature of the God that you read about in the scriptures is contradictory. Therefore, it can't be. So Bible says, for example, I think these were the exact examples he used. God is love, and then we go look at the poor Amalekites. Yeah, cry my eyes out for the poor Amalekites. Look at his treatment of the poor Amalekites. How can this be a God of love if he goes and smites all these people? So his nature is contradictory. Thus, that character cannot exist as written. That seemed to be the substance of his argument. Now, you can take issue with that as an argument, but then you owe it, you're in a debate. So that's kind of what Gavin was doing. You didn't answer the question. It's not a question about the morality of the God in the Bible. It's a question. And then Skylar was trying to say that he was showing an internal contradiction in the character as written. So basically Gavin was saying, you didn't answer the question, this doesn't prove anything. But Skylar was saying he did. So there's the impasse right there. You owe it. Gavin owed it to Skylar because it's a debate to explain to him, or at least try to prove to him, why this doesn't answer the question. So then you can debate that. It's a little bit of a shift of what you were originally debating, but not that much. It still would have been on topic. And it would have been relatively fruitful, relatively productive conversation. So what Gavin did was just kind of shut it down. No, you didn't answer the question, taking my ball and going home, you lose the debate because I declared so. If your opponent doesn't agree with you, and Skylar didn't agree with him, then you owe it to your opponent to try and explain it to them why that's true. So that was the original problem. Now, having said that, I get why Skylar was frustrated. I guess why it was exasperating to him. Totally understand that. The original impulse, Gavin owed him a better explanation than just, you didn't answer the question. But on a scale of 1 to 10, I get why Skylar was upset. I get why that made him impatient. I get why he was frustrated. But on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a frustration level about a 4 or 5. He should have been slightly exasperated. Somehow he wound up at 12, right? 20 minutes into somehow he right at 12 right away. He was really, really exasperated, immediately. Now, I get why he was exasperated, and I think I explained it. It makes sense. Gavin owed him a bit more explanation than just, you didn't answer the question. Fine. But now, it's up to you. It's up to Skylar in that situation. Be a little bit more patient and trust the audience. Say, look, I answered the question. There's an internal contradiction in the Bible, which he did kind of do, and he tried to explain what his argument was, that there's an internal contradiction, therefore they cancel each other out. He did try to explain it, but his frustration level was at a 12 when it should have been out of, he should have been mildly exasperated and was completely and utterly beside himself. So he never went into the intermediate stage of an unproductive debate where you're kind of like, oh, I can't believe you don't get this. And you're patient and you trust the audience to see your point of view. And you patiently deal with the guy even if you think they're being, dense. So you patiently lay out your argument. So I don't know why he jumped to 12. There's no back history between him and Gavin. I guess he's heard this argument. I don't get it. He went immediately to way more exasperated than seemed to have anything to do with what was going on. So that's where it completely broke down, and then there was almost no bringing it back to any type of productive conversation. It went from there, and it was totally unproductive from that point forward, and that was literally 15 minutes into the debate. First thing that Gavin said was, you didn't answer the question. Debate is supposed to be, why the Christian God does not exist. You didn't prove it, and then Skylar didn't accept that. So that's the first problem. If you say to someone in a debate, you didn't do X, or you didn't explain X, or you're wrong, and your debate partner doesn't accept it, the burden is on you to demonstrate it to them, to keep the conversation going. But, like I said, that's exasperating on a level of 5. Why Skylar automatically went to 12, I have no idea. Maybe, I really don't know. It didn't quite fit the situation. He's all of a sudden foaming at the mouth, and it just wasn't quite that upsetting yet. I get why he was upset, but it wasn't close to where he was. Normally there's a process in a conflict of degeneration, and by the time it gets to the point where someone's actually upset and name-calling, which Skylar started to do, and cursing at the person, you kind of empathize with the person doing it because you got frustrated along with the person. This time Skylar kind of jumped the gun, got way more frustrated with him than the situation warranted, before it had organically degenerated of its own accord. That's how I score it at the beginning. So Gavin owed him a better explanation for sure, but Skylar got way more upset than the situation warranted, given what was going on. Now, got to trust the audience, but to both parties. If you think your opponent didn't answer the question, then you spell it out for the audience, and you spell it out patiently for that person why they didn't answer the question. Then you can debate that. Then you can have a productive conversation about that. So let me try to let me take it from there. The substance of Skylar's argument, and I think this is what Gavin was trying to say, but I'm not really sure. But Skylar does this a lot, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of atheists, anti-theists do this a lot. And they conflate two different types of conversation. There are two different types of discussions you can have about the God. One is a proof of God conversation, and the other is a theological conversation. They are totally different. Now, Skylar's an atheist. An atheist can participate in a theological conversation, but you cannot conflate the two, which Skylar does all the time, and he did in this debate. Conflate the two and then oscillate back and forth between them. Why does he do it? Because it's an easy way to win a debate. You oscillate back and forth between them, then you can sow confusion, you can pin your opponent really, really easily. And Skylar's actually really good at this. That doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. So two entirely different types of conversation. A theological conversation is discussing the nature and attributes of God as we understand it. So an atheist can participate in that conversation, but for the duration of the conversation, they have to participate as if God is real. So you are discussing the nature and the attributes of the character Yahweh or Jesus in the Bible. For the entire conversation, if you're an atheist, you can participate in that. You have to have that conversation as if the character is real. Just like we would be talking about Hamlet. Hamlet is a fictional character. But when we discuss the attributes of Hamlet and the motivations of Hamlet and what Hamlet's doing in any given time, I would say to you, when Hamlet went into this room and he said, "Get thee to a nunnery, why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners?" What do you think he meant? You wouldn't turn around and go to me, "Hamlet's not real, Craig." What do you mean, what did he mean? Prove that he exists. We're talking about the character as written. So for the purposes of the conversation, we're talking about him as if he's a real character. That's what a theological conversation is. Do you see how clear that is? You can't conflate the two. Atheists, anti-theists do it all the time. And that's why they do it, because it's an easy way to win the debate. You sow confusion. Matt, think of it as Hamlet. I'm saying, when Hamlet goes to this room and he goes, "Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? Get thee to a nunnery. I am myself indifferent, honest, but I could accuse me of such things it would be better my mother had not borne me. I'm very proud, revengeful, ambitious." And I said to you, what do you think he meant by it would be better if his mother hadn't borne him? He's proud, revengeful, ambitious. You said, Hamlet doesn't even exist, Craig. You see how non-productive that conversation would be? But that's what atheists, anti-theists do all the time when they're having theological conversations and they're conflating them with proof of God conversations. Why do they do it? Because it's easy to pin your opponent, easy to win a debate. But it isn't the right way to discuss these things. For a theological conversation, and an atheist and anti-theist has to have that conversation as if God is real. So you say, when Yahweh smote the Amalekites, isn't that a contradiction with him saying that he's a God of love? When Jesus says in the Bible, "That which you have done in the least of my children," don't you think that conflicts with his earlier treatment of the Amalekites? Then it's a perfectly legitimate question. You're discussing the nature and attributes of God as written. But the problem is, and Skylar does this a lot, this is why he wins a lot of these debates. Maybe that's why he got frustrated, because he realized he can't win this debate if the guy just goes, you didn't answer the question. But it wasn't a successful tactic on Gavin. I'm not endorsing the tactic. You have to explain to him why he can't. But if you're having a theological conversation, these are the attributes of God as written. This is how the character presents himself in the Old Testament. This is how the character presents himself in the New Testament. There's a contradiction there. Now we can have that conversation. It isn't a proof of God conversation. It isn't. That's a totally different thing. It's a totally different thing. And if you're conflating them, you're doing it in a way that's disingenuous. Not necessarily on purpose, because I get why atheists, the reason why it's not on purpose is atheists and anti-theists actually think this way. Because a lot of them were raised as fundamentalist Christians. So every little piece of information they get about the Bible says X, they think it's all groundbreakingly important and it all points to the same conclusion. Oh, look, I learned something new. God doesn't exist. See, I told you. That's why they always frame these things this way, but it's a dishonest form of framing. It's also why I never engage in these type of conversations. I just take it as a matter of faith. It's perfectly rational, perfectly good justifications for some of the things in the Bible as written. But they weren't relevant to me when I became a Christian. I became a Christian, I went to church and I was like, oh wow, and I had a really powerful experience. I was like, hey, wait a minute, God is real. Had nothing to do with anything written in the Old Testament. And it wasn't contingent on anything written in the Old Testament. So therefore, anything that we debate about why it says X in the Old Testament, these are academic questions. They're noteworthy and they're of interest, but only in an academic way. And I could just as easily put them on a back burner and never think about them again from now until the day I die. That's how relevant they are to the living to the actual faith, to the actual experience of being a Christian. That's how relevant they are. They're not. I know a lot of Christians who are really, really committed Christians who actually, God is central to their life. It's central to how they order their life. When the Bible says, trust the Lord with all your heart and cling not to your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. So they're trying to go for a job and they start praying, which job do you want me to get? Then they're at a job, they have a situation, they come home and they pray that night, they get up with their prayer group, and they search the scriptures. What should I do to handle this person at work? That's how they actually live their life, in all their ways acknowledging God, and he will make their path straight, and trusting him to do such. So the question of what God did with the Amalekites, for example, totally irrelevant to the actual lived experience of being a Christian. Totally irrelevant. Academic question. Doesn't really come up in church. Doesn't really come up in your real life. It does if you're on Twitter. Why? Because the atheists bring it up 100 times a day. It's contested ground. Because they think it helps their cause. It doesn't. It's irrelevant to the proposition God exists, God does not exist. They're interesting questions, but they're academic questions. And they're only interesting up to a point. They're really not all that interesting, to tell you the God's honest truth. They're really not. They're academic questions. They are immaterial to the actual lived experience of being a Christian out there in the world. The real question is, does your connection to God in a real way impact your real dealings in the real world? When you prayed, God help me find the job, did something actually help you find the right job? And when you had a situation at work and you started praying, did the scriptures actually guide you and help you, and your experience with other Christians and your connection to the spiritual, did it actually help you in that situation at work? That's the real question. That's the real reason why people walk away from church. It isn't because they dug through the Old Testament and found some dopey question that nobody cares about. Oh my God, I can't believe they forced an abortion in this one scene. Who cares? You could just as easily put that on the back burner, never think about it again. From now until the day you die, it wouldn't affect 1 minute of your Christian walk. Why is it so groundbreakingly important to you? Because you pretend that it is. Pretend. I said pretend. I didn't say it really is. I said you pretend that it is. Why? Because that means because that's the real reason. Why is the real question. Not it is so groundbreakingly important, because it isn't. Now, I get it. These are YouTube debates. So we're in this contested ground debating over this. I'm just talking about as a real thing, as a real Christian experience. If you're an atheist, these questions aren't that groundbreakingly important. It's funny because I was streaming with this new guy, Nathan. He kind of calls himself an agnostic Christian. He's very similar to John Buck. Both young guys, both really nice guys, really bright. John Buck is kind of an agnostic Christian too. But he leans towards Christian. Nathan kind of leans towards atheist. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he starts streaming as an atheist in the next year and a half. Kind of leans that way. And the thing that was most immediately apparent to me, he starts asking some of these questions too. But is the angst he's bringing to the table. Like, if I don't find an answer for this, then God doesn't really exist. That's not proper cognitive framing. It's really not. The questions are academic. The angst he was bringing to the table isn't warranted. The answer is God only knows. God only knows where I'd be without. That's the real answer for a lot of these questions. And if you're a practicing Christian in good standing who has learned to trust God with all your heart, that's a good enough answer. God only knows where I'd be without you. I thought it was appropriate. No, it's not. I thought it was. See what I'm saying? So, continue to have debates on the subject. Debate this contested ground. But if you are an atheist who actually wants to experience God, know in your heart that they are irrelevant. They are immaterial. They're academic questions. The question is, are you an atheist who actually wants to experience God? The real answer, no, you're probably not. There aren't a lot of you out there. You'd rather debunk, dismiss, discredit. That seems to be your operating agenda. I'd rather prove that you're wrong, Craig, than listen to you and try and experience what you experience. I'd rather try to prove you're wrong. It's not very wise. It's not the appropriate response. Honestly, it's really not. It's your prerogative. It's not smart, though. That's all. That's all for now, kids. Yeah, whatever. Ramble. That's what I do. Ramble on. Now's the time, and time is now. No, it didn't work. All right, never mind. Yeah, all right, ramble. That's it. That's all for now, kids. So it was a dumpster fire. I mean, what do you want from me? The debate shut down quick, and it shut down completely, and it went nowhere. And, Gavin owed him better explanations. But Skylar didn't have to be screaming bloody murder about it right from the jump. He could have been patient through the whole thing. It wasn't that terrible. So, there you have it, kids. That's my analysis. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.